So as you all are grabbing your seats, I'd like to welcome our next panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about navigating space science and exploration policy. This session is very generously sponsored by KBR. Thank you very much to everyone at KBR. Jeff, thank you. So please join me as we welcome our session's moderator, Kevin Kelly, partner at Actum. Kevin served under U.S. Senator Barbara Mikulski and was the majority clerk for the Senate Appropriation Committee's second largest subcommittee overseeing budgets, policy, and programs for a number of federal agencies. Now at Actum, Kevin helps clients overcome legislative challenges and regulatory barriers that hinder their long-term success. He has proven experience working across most federal agencies and possesses a deep understanding of the annual appropriations process. No one better suited for this session. Kevin, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm going to ask each of my colleagues on the panel to introduce themselves and their heritage with the space program.
All right, Kevin, thank you so much. And first and foremost, thank you for all that you have done through the years on many programs, and particular tribute to the valued contributions that you made to the James Webb Space Telescope. And seeing it be successful. Absolutely fantastic. Indeed, by way of introduction, first I'll offer the role that you know me in here, which is honored to be serving as the president of the board of the American Astronautical Society. Fabulous role to have the opportunity to serve in. I also serve in a role as a co-chair of the Washington Exec Space Council, which provides opportunities for the community to come together here in the DC area. And then my primary role with the Aerospace Corporation, I serve as a principal director for the Space Enterprise Evolution Directorate, where we spend our days thinking about the future and trying to prepare for the space that looks very different through the windshield than it does through the rearview mirror, and being ready for those emerging trends.
Trent?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm Trent Martin. I'm the Senior Vice President of Space Systems for Intuitive Machines. Why am I up here on a panel about space science and exploration policy? I have somewhat of a unique background. I worked for NASA and for Lockheed Martin for many years down at the Johnson Space Center, but I was working on the alpha magnetic spectrometer. I was the project manager for the alpha magnetic spectrometer. I also worked a little bit of James Webb Space Telescope. For those of you in the room that worked on that, you're welcome. I helped get the chamber A up and running so we could test it down at JSC. I now work as the lead at Intuitive Machines, building quite a few spacecraft and systems that we're working on, including the Near Space Network services and what we call the Lunar Data Network ground systems, as well as the satellite systems. We'll be putting 5 satellites in orbit to help Artemis send data to and from the moon and provide position navigation and timing network around the moon. We, of course, are working on the Lunar Terrain Vehicle in our offices in Houston in partnership with some of our key partners like Boeing and Michelin and AVL. And we have the OMS contract here at Goddard. We're working OSAM, unfortunately, and JPSS, and we'll talk a little bit about OSAM today, I'm sure. We have nuclear power, fission surface power project that we're working on with the Department of Energy and NASA. We have nuclear heating for Survive the Night, nuclear low power satellite systems with both NASA and with the Air Force Research Laboratory. We have the LRO and ShadowCam science analysis team led by Dr. Mark Robinson under us out of our Arizona office. And we have Dr. Ben Bussey as our lead scientist supporting us on all the activities that we do in lunar. We take the legs off of our lunar lander. We have an orbital transfer vehicle, which we're offering up into the market, and have an opportunity that we're working right now to use that for an agency. And of course, we have lunar landers. And just a couple weeks ago, we landed for the second time on the surface of the moon in a year.
Great. Thank you so much. Alberto.
Yes, good afternoon. So my name is Alberto Conti. I'm the Vice President General Manager at BAE Systems, Space and Mission Systems. It's a mouthful. Just remember Ball Aerospace Heritage. That's who we are. That's where we came from. Our company has a long, long heritage of supporting science over the last 70 years or so. You know us for the Hubble Space Telescope, for the optics on James Webb, for any images of Mars that you see. We talk about Mars today. It's our camera, and Pluto, for example, right? Well, the images of Pluto that we built. So we have a long, long heritage of supporting science. Fundamentally, at least the civil space portion of our company is rooted in very deeply rooted in science. I mean, I am personally a recovering astrophysicist, having worked at Space Telescope Science Institute for many, many years, and then having joined industry. And the passion that I think we all have here, and you're going to see it on the panel as well, is it's true that Kevin has decades of experience in navigating policy, but policy is also a tool for us to inspire the generations that are coming after us in terms of science. And so I'm keen to understand exactly what it's going to look like for the future and how science is going to shape the future generations. We have folks in here, and so we're going to need Kevin's direction in that.
So our format's going to be a little different from the last panel. We're going to have it so that it is interactive as we address a whole series of questions. I was encouraged by the sponsors to make it more like a Bill Maher session than it would be a kind of a sage on the stage. So hopefully without some of the R-rated behavior of Bill Maher. But in that context, I'd like you to think about something. So, you know, in politics, they say that you campaign in poetry and then you govern in prose. And that's true, right? There's the aspirations, and then there's the reality once you take over and look under the hood and see what's out there. And this afternoon, I think the first panel that we had after lunch was, you know, a marvelous group of experts talking about the opportunity, the excitement, the enthusiasm of lunar science, lunar exploration, all that goes there. And hopefully that we'll be able over the coming years, and that's a question of how many years, we'll put the infrastructure in place to realize those. But today, we come back to the second panel, and we're kind of in the prose version of what happens to civil and military space going forward. And I think that's, you know, as we think about NASA, we heard, those of you who were here at lunch heard from Mr. Ivey. NASA's in a period of transition. And I was thinking today, this is the 7th transition I've seen since coming to Washington in the early and mid 1980s, where the transition came from one party to the next and how it influenced NASA in the transition. So we want to talk a little bit about that today. And transitions are always a challenge. Is there a threat? Is it a threat, or is it an opportunity? Well, in this current context, you know, it depends on where you sit, where you stand. And there certainly are lots of potential threats and some potential significant opportunities. And the question is how you manage those threats and capitalize upon the opportunities to, again, achieve the stated objective, which is to advance U.S. leadership in science and exploration and world leadership. So in the threats, I think you all know most of the threats that are out there. They're relatively self-evident. Budgetary, overarching policy shifts, an exploration program that struggled to have credible schedule and cost estimates. I mean, we know that fact. China, as has been mentioned over and over, as an overarching threat to U.S. and world leadership in space. You have a whole situation today over the last 10 weeks of a core workforce on both the contractor and the civil servant side that I think we can charitably say is in turmoil and with high degrees of anxiety. And we face a science program, particularly important for our local community here at Goddard, where the pipeline is not very robust for the future, right? There's lots of potential choices, but the future opportunities beyond what's in the queue that's currently in formulation is pretty thin. Flip side of that, there's some significant opportunities. The race against China is actually the reality upon which this community has an opportunity to seize and drive investment in the programs and the projects that we all care about and love so very much. And with it, and that's part of the genius of today's panel, is how do we use new commercial entrants to really realize an opportunity of a revitalized space program that is more affordable, more efficient, delivers more value more consistently. And so with that, I'm going to open the question to the panel. Given the uncertainty with what I'll say is the broader, America First MAGA agenda, how do you all see the science enterprise as being able to drive back renewed interest and investment in NASA? And as part of thinking about that, should there be changes or shifts in the way we set priorities within those programs, which today heavily relies upon science objectives that are done by the National Academy? So I open that as the first question. Who wants to go?
That's okay. Maybe I'll take it. Yeah. So thanks, Evan. So I think when I was thinking about this, when we're talking, I thought that we need to step back a little bit and look at the history and where we have been, right? So NASA in particular has had, decades-long leadership, and I'm thinking about, groundbreaking missions. I'm old enough to remember Hubble, obviously, but look at James Webb. Look at what they're trying to do for the future. There are missions that are in every aspect of SMD that are being transformational over the last, 50 plus decades. And so that leadership, I don't think is going away, and the leadership is here to stay. But the leadership, as you just mentioned, might be a risk just because it seems harder and harder to be able to tie it to national interests. For example, you mentioned the threat that we have with China. We can talk about the national defense portion. We talk about the civil portion, but I think what remains a focus of at least mine and maybe others is the fact that we have to react to what's happening on the ground. We have to be able to articulate better how the science enables, and the discoveries that have made NASA a household name can then sort of deliver for the future of the nation, I would say, right? And so I think this is my opinion, obviously, but I don't think we've been great at delivering that message lately. I know, for example, I'm a big fan of the decadal process that NASA, probably one of the unique aspects of science in the US has, but that decadal process seems a little stale right now. Seems like when we do it every decade, things are changing so much faster. The things on the ground are changing so much faster, and we're not able to sort of grasp where we need to be going, right? And so one of the suggestions that I possibly have is, there's a mid-decadal every 5 years we go through, and that mid-decadal I don't think has delivered in the way we expected. We're not reshuffling and reprioritizing things because of what happened, right? So I think we have an opportunity here, as you said. The risk is that there's some irrelevance there, but the opportunity is that we can become a lot more relevant if we are able to meet the cycles, I think, of what we see of industry and commercial companies. That is not a 10-year cycle. It's a 2-year cycle. It's a 3-year cycle.
So given that, how would, Trent, you or Ron, how would you see the role of these new commercial entrants and the whole concept behind CLIPS as driving a reset or infused changes to the way we do science?
Yeah, so the CLIPS model is proving to be successful in that we now have 3 landers that have landed on the moon and successfully operated experiments on the surface and sent back data. We have 10 total missions that have been planned over the next few years, and all for the price of what typically would have been 1 mission in the past. So from the scientific community, you get 10, 15 experiments on each mission, 10 missions. That's a lot of science. Now, it may not be the exact science that you're looking for. It may not be the perfect mission that gets you the decadal science that you need in 2035 for 1 mission to 1 place. But there's a lot more scientists that will be involved in those types of missions. And the approach that is used, which is a firm fixed price commercial approach, which is, hey, go give me this data from the moon. Don't build me a spacecraft. Just send the data back from the moon. Is working. And in fact, if you look over the last 15 years, really the only thing that has worked, at least out of the human space flight side of things, is space station, which has been a very, very powerful tool, and anything that has had commercial in front of it, right? Those have been extremely successful. We're seeing that in CLIPS now as well. And I encourage this community to maybe take up that cross and say, hey, this is an idea that gets us more science over the long run and faster than waiting for the next decadal to come out and waiting for the next mission and running to Washington to ask for the next $10 billion mission because it's likely not going to be there.
So do you think that you could change the Explorer and Discovery, as examples, smaller class science missions to actually, is there a CLIPS thing that could actually increase the cadence for that? Because that does, both of those programs, drive younger investigators, right, as co-PIs and as scientists, where they can build their chops to be ready for the bigger, kind of just, flagship missions. What do you think, Ron?
So building on the blocks, right, of faster cadence, right, that Alberto has mentioned, and the broader set of blocks that comes with the commercial approach, right? It is possible to enable the community to recognize being able to move further faster by virtue of being able to have a more integrated approach across the enterprise. One of the challenges that we can consider is that up until the recent past, missions have predominantly been very large, conducted by relatively few overall players, the NASA, Space Force, et cetera, with a relatively few set of space missions in mind that they were focused on. There's evidence that we are transitioning from that legacy of purpose-built, a finite number of purpose-built systems to a future of a very large number of commercially provided systems that are operating in an ecosystem. In an ecosystem environment, it is possible for scientists and other beneficiaries of space capabilities to be able to harvest and network and connect the kinds of capabilities that they need for their purposes in ways that just weren't possible in the past. So I do see a very significant policy opportunity to shift towards encouraging and fostering space enterprise integration in that context.
Hey, Kevin, can I add one thing? So, but I think there's a caveat to all of this, in my opinion, which is, I would call it, we need to rethink about how we do contracting, right? There's inherent inefficiencies at how I think contracting is being conducted right now that leads to, I would say, friction within NASA to how you develop mission like CLIPS, right? CLIPS are great. I think, Martin and others have talked about this, but at the same time, if you want to expand it to explorers and discovery mission, I think we need a different type of partnership with commercial companies, right? And that partnership has to go through understanding that us, BAE Systems, but many, many others in this room, most of the people in this room that are part of industry have done this for the last 50 plus years. There has to be a level of trust in the way we negotiate a contract and we negotiate terms. There has to be I will call it like a scalable partnership almost, right? Where we have to partner together to say, yes, we want to re-architect what discovery looks like because we don't want to launch it every 10 years, right? At the cost of 10 billion, we need to launch it every 3 years at a fraction of that cost. So how do we do that? And it's not just contracting, it's also being able to trust industry. And I can tell you an example from my own experience, right? 2 examples. One is an as example, one is an NGO, right? So we launched a satellite called MetainSat for the Environmental Defense Fund, for which we built the payload, the instrument, right? That's an NGO that raised funding, and then it came to us, and it's an instrument that is as sophisticated as anything that we built for NASA at a fraction of the cost, because they came to us and they trusted us. We applied the same exact methodology to build an instrument for, a spacecraft for NASA for heliophysics called Carruthers, right? It's going to launch with IMAP later this year. Exactly the same methodology, fitting within a very, very limited small cost gap for NASA, right? But it was a little harder because there's always this tension about contracting and FAR and everything else. So I think if we have a scalable partnership or a partnership that is beyond just what is written on paper, but there's a little more trust on what we could do in support of these missions, I think we're going to go very far.
Questions from the audience so far about this? In the back. Yes, please.
Cheryl. Hi, thank you. Cheryl Reed, Northrop Grumman. Hey, Alberto, I
Hey.
would actually build on your comments because I
Sure.
think you're spot on, but I think we need to take it a step higher. You know, there's all this discussion, of course, about efficiency and agencies and people. But those agencies and people are bound by the regulations that
Yep.
exist. They're bound by the policy. And I think we need to, start a conversation on the Hill and to start getting that regulatory reform going. The FAR in particular, it is hugely burdensome. And there's many other policies too. So I think really that's the next step. We have to help the agencies get those barriers removed from them. And how do we do that?
Where we sent Kevin to Congress.
Well, there,
Easy button, easy button.
202-236-1812. No. So there is actually an effort in the Armed Services Committee. Senator Wicker, who's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, has a push, something called the Forged Act, which is designed to kind of cut out the middle level of processes. And of course that, having watched this over many years, and you watch every new administration comes in and they discover these horrific things on platforms in both NASA and in the DoD that, they thought it was going to cost X and now it's X plus 48%. And they don't have the envelope to deal with that, right? If you look at the shipbuilding budget in the Navy, they're struggling with that on many platforms there, but they're by no means alone. The Sentinel program for the Air Force is another good example. NASA has plenty on its own. So I do think, frankly, you've got to unite around what those look like and what is the risk sharing between the government and the industry that they're willing to take. Because the government will say, well, fine, under some of these costs, do it fixed price, and industry refuses to do it that way. And so, the question is, what's the right balance? And I don't know that in the NASA world, we've realized that, because in many instances, we lack a lot of transparency about how tough things are and about suggestions for real cost savings. We struggle with this, we struggle with this on return to flight after Challenger. We struggle with this on station. We obviously have struggled with this tremendously under both Constellation and now Artemis. And so, the question is how you reach that middle ground. And I hope, frankly, with the new administrator coming in, that they find some way to bridge that divide and work as the Pentagon is working to try and do that. But it requires industry and organizations like this to come together and say, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that we need to do, and get input as well from the government, who's on the other side, having to manage the risk and who's going to then get hauled up to Congress when something doesn't go right. I'd like to turn to exploration a little bit, which obviously is on everyone's mind. It's a huge issue out there. We're running into a situation, as you know, where non-defense discretionary spending, is what Congressman Ivey was saying at lunch, is facing tremendous pressures, right? If you look at everything that President Trump said he would not cut going into his campaign, he took 71% of the federal budget off the table, right? Medicare, Medicaid, but they're going to cut Medicaid. But, the key entitlement programs, Social Security, defense, veterans, and interest on the debt, which today now is actually larger than all non-emergency, non-defense discretionary spending per year. It's over $1 trillion now. So the question, I think, as we look at the exploration program is, how do we achieve the right reset on that to reflect the new fiscal realities, the technical challenges that we know are out there, with whether you're in the SLS camp or whether you're in the Starship camp, as far as how we're going to get back to the moon and back to stay, as President Bush the father said. And so the question is, what are we looking at in terms of how would you make adjustments to the program moving forward? And I guess the question is there some way to do that without ceding ground to the Chinese? And that's a wide open question. It's very controversial, obviously, but it's like the elephant in the room for where NASA goes in the future. And it's going to be one that Congress and the administration is going to grapple with over the next 18 to 24 months, to be sure.
I'll wade into those waters. So, one of the key elements to consider relative to competition with peer adversaries, is the value of global affinity. One of the things that I haven't heard yet in today's discussions, but which has been prominent in discussions in general, is the recognition that accomplishments in space accrue in value in terms of global affinity, where the investments are measured in billions and the return is measured in trillions, in terms of what comes back. And so, one of the things that we may not place enough of a premium on is the value that the United States gained from the Apollo era in terms of recognition around the world, and what that did for us in terms of opportunities for trading, right, for positive economic security type activities, and also the benefits that accrued to the U.S. In terms of avoided conflict, in terms of national security. So it's not easy to draw a line, to make a connection between investments, between national security and economic security in some cases. But when we look at it in terms of global affinity, there does appear to be a direct line. And that's one thing. And the kinds of support that we get from the rest of the world, from James Webb Space Telescope, it fits into this category. So I know there's other comments to be shared here, but that's one I would really like to put stomp.
Trent, what do you think about the reset?
Yeah, so the issue is you can't have a program that takes 20 years to have anything fly in space. It just doesn't work. You have to do it faster than that. You have to move quickly. You have to be landing something every year. And programs like CLIPS, it's not just CLIPS, but programs like that allow you to be able to show a steady progress towards your ultimate goal. And if your ultimate goal is to, make sure that we don't cede the moon to China, then you need to be landing things on the moon regularly. You need to, and you can tie those to Mars activities. Absolutely. We do need to do that. It's our closest planetary body that we can go test out on. And we can do it on a regular basis, and you do it with these small incremental missions. And you take things like Artemis and saying, oh, I need a base, and I need all this infrastructure that goes with the base. Don't build that to be human rated. Build it. Don't go the opposite direction. Don't build something that's human rated and downsize it so that I can land utility equipment and close. Build something that's simple and easy, upsize it so I can land utility equipment and close. It won't cost as much, and you can do it faster.
Alberto?
I don't know. I think they said both of them what I completely agree with both of them, and I think they said it very eloquently. The thing that I would say is, from my end, I would like to see like achievable priorities, right? I would like to see, I think Lori showed the Artemis timeline, right, earlier today, and I think we need to understand, as Trent just mentioned, is this an achievable priority? Are the timelines that are being described, are they achievable within the next few years? And with the idea of satisfying the missions that Artemis says, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think because of what you just said, you need to balance the roles that the government has with the commercial partners, right? There has to be a different partnership if you want to meet those faster timelines, because right now, the way it is, we're not fast enough. We're just not fast enough, right? And then all of this, I would say, we need to be accountable to ourselves. The government need to be accountable to themselves, and we need to be, I think, have the will to regularly reassess what the priorities are, right? Because the priorities are going to change. There might be some technologies that come up quickly. You might learn a lot if you launch every 3 years as opposed to every decade, right?
Well, it's clear that that one of the exercises of the new Congress and the new administration is to get cost realism when it comes to what Artemis is going to cost and how long it will take to execute, and do all the moving parts fit, right? Do they close at this point? We found in the transition from Bush 41 to Clinton on the space station, it was completely off track, and the agency was scrambling to adjust timelines and requirements to show that they were going to keep to the commitment. But we discovered not long into the whole discussion, about after the first year, that it wasn't. And so that's likely to occur at some level and at some detail for people to kind of really assess. Because it's great, Artemis 2, which is the Apollo 8 equivalent, that happened. I was 10 years old at Christmas Eve, 1968. Neil Armstrong went 7 months later, right? He and Aldrin launched in July of 69. And so the question is, what's the gap between 2 and 3? And how do you build that and make it viable? Because there's a lot of questions about that I think that are out there, and we'll have to. I guess one question though, this center, when Hubble launched, everybody was like gritting their teeth, right? Because, you had the Challenger accident. Hubble was supposed to be the next flight. It was delayed, obviously, 4 full years. And then it turned out that the shuttle basically became the rescue 911 for the Hubble telescope, right? Because it fixed the spherical aberration. And then it was serviced 4 additional times. So you built 3 telescopes for the price of 2, and it remains the most productive scientific observatory in the history of space science. 1,000 papers a year to this day, 35 years after launch. So I guess my panel, the marriage between science and human spaceflight, which has been decoupled really since Hubble for the most part. How do we get back to that, where the 2 are not seen as competitors inside of the civil space program? Because it sure sounds like today, it feels like the 2 are competitors, even though that's not stated explicitly, but in the budget fights, it sure looks that way. What's the thought there?
Go ahead, Ron.
Shared planning is at least a component of that. If the community is working together on, use a master planning construct as a rubric, right? If you've got a city that wants to evolve, and they bring on a team of master planners who engage with everyone, who has equities in the way that the city is going to evolve, and they work out a plan together, and then they go off and they resource and they implement the plan together. There is that opportunity, not only for within NASA between science and exploration, but to the point that's been really foot stomped here, which is to include the commercial sector in that process. Let the fabric of the capability of organizations across this country actually come together to achieve these national objectives together.
Yeah, and I can give you an example of that. So I won't go human and science immediately. We'll talk about that in just a second. But on the last mission that I just flew, we had an experiment that was really a demonstration. It was funded by STMD. The whole goal of it was to prove out a technology. But I reached out to the science community and said, what science experiments do you want to put on this? From a purely commercial standpoint. I didn't get that from NASA pushing it to me. I went out to the science community, identified a neutron spectrometer and a pyrometer that I could put onto the hopper that I was flying to the moon. Unfortunately, we didn't get it to work, but the idea is still there. The idea is that commercial companies can reach out to scientific communities, bring in those instruments that sometimes were built on other platforms, in particular on the neutron spectrometer, which was built through a partnership with JPL, and then we flew it. And the idea was that if I flew it and gathered this data, would NASA be interested in buying it? Yeah, probably would be. Now in that case, ESA bought it, and I won't make any money from it because I didn't actually get any data. But the idea is still there that we can do that. So can you do the same thing with humans and science? The trick from the scientific perspective, and I say this in the most respectful way, knowing that there's a lot of scientists in this room, is sometimes you want the pristine science. You want the perfect science.
What do you mean sometimes?
Okay, all the time you want the pristine
Bingo.
science. Sometimes you're going to get 90% of it, and that's good enough for right now. And you get that science, and it'll get you to the next step where you'll get the next 10%. You got to be willing to take that when you get it and let that happen when the human spaceflight world and the scientific world can merge together. And I kind of disagree. I think space station has been a good place where we've done that. Some of the science community in here would probably beg to differ with me, saying it's not some of it's not super science that they'd like to see, but it's science that's happening every single day on the space station right now.
Alberto, what about
Um,
your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I was thinking about this. I had two thoughts, right? So one would be that for me, if you look at the where the budget for NASA might be going, you mentioned about, potential cuts coming through, right? So and if we would still want to do science, which I would love to continue doing, we have to revector where we're looking for funding, right? So to me, Artemis is a big sign on its back. They're funded, right? They're probably going to be funded. So can we target that funding for for enabling some science? And I think in order to do that, we need to have early inclusion of science goals in the Artemis missions, right? They cannot be an afterthought, right? It has to be, and there's some of them already there, right? But we have to include them, not just an afterthought. They have to be part of the overall mission, right? And there are missions, because I think Lori mentioned science at the very beginning, but we have to be open about the fact that part of the way in which, in my opinion, the Hubble was successful was because of what you mentioned. The space shuttle was there to support it, right? So can we enable the Artemis mission to also be successful because it supports incredible science, right? And the second thing I would say is that we have another opportunity, especially Goddard here, with the Hubble World Observatory, right? So HWO is coming, is going to come in the next few years. There's a tremendous opportunity to do absolutely revolutionary science for the world and for humanity and for everybody else. And so how do we leverage HWO, in terms of the science that they can produce, to pair it with human space exploration? Maybe it's serviceable like Hubble was. Maybe it's I don't know, maybe there's something on Gateway that we could do in order to support it. I don't know, right? But there are things that we could do in order to enable HWO to be even more successful than what James Webb is, which is not serviceable, for example.
Thank you. Questions we have from the audience at this point? I thought we might get quite a few here. Okay, so,
Uh-oh, what did we say?
Yes, I'm Bill Jones from Executive Intelligence Review. With regard to cooperation, now, of course, the space program has always had cooperation with Russia in spite of the difficulties over the last few years. But now with the we think will be a thaw in the relationship, there's a possibility for greater cooperation. And Mr. Dmitriev, who was the head of the infrastructure fund in Russia, who was on the sidelines of the Saudi Arabia meeting, came up with a proposal that he'd like to talk with Elon Musk about going to Mars. And of course, the Russians, if we go to Mars, the Russians have a greater capability because they have developed the most developed plasma engine in the world, according to public reports. We may have something in black box operations, but I tend to doubt it. And that would take you to Mars in 2 months. So indicating whether that gels or not is another question. But it seems to me that the cooperation with Russia on a larger scale, which I think the president has also called for, would help to deal with some of the financial issues. They could be a part of Artemis. I think there's no exclusion for them to be a part of it, except for the fact that they have this close cooperation with the Chinese, which they're not going to give up. But other than that, I think there would be a situation in which this cooperation now could be a center of success for the U.S. program as well, if we're willing to cooperate with them. I was wondering if anybody had comments on that, or if there has been a discussion, because this now is in the public domain, the possibility of greater space cooperation between the U.S. and Russia.
I think there'll be a lot of discussion on that if that gets real. And I don't know. I think that there's a lot of hurdles to get before that happens again. I think that's my take on it.
Just consideration with all opportunities for partnerships, is to consider the benefits, right? The value proposition from both a national security and an economic security perspective.
Other questions? In the back?
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted somebody behind me. Kathy Mont from NASA Goddard. I'd like to revisit the topic of the decadal surveys having served on both the most recent astrophysics and planetary science decadal. I'm very grateful that you brought up the Habitable Worlds Observatory, because what the real purpose of the decadal surveys is to identify the science community, the broad science community's highest priority questions. And the Habitable Worlds Observatory is the ideal observatory to address that. With the planetary science decadal, we had 12 questions that are the highest priority questions in planetary science across the entire interdisciplinary field. And the highest priority mission coming from that is an ice giants mission, because our dearth of knowledge on these two planetary systems is holding us up from answering fundamental questions for planetary science. And I'm curious if you have any answers for addressing the planetary science questions, because I'm only hearing about landing on the moon right now.
Well, who
Go ahead.
wants to go first?
Go
You may
go
go
for it.
first?
No, no,
Go ahead,
go,
go
go,
ahead.
go, 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 go.
Well, I mean,
kind.
in planetary science, obviously the elephant in the room is what happens to MSR, right? I mean, that's, and clearly,
Yeah.
you know, you can't do a mission, a flagship mission like the ice giant to Uranus. If it's going to go again like Europa, which took forever to launch, takes forever long to get there, and ended up costing $6.5 billion. It's going to be a phenomenal mission when it gets there here in 5.5 years. But you've got to find a way to do it with greater cost discipline. And that is the challenge of most of the flagship missions that I know go back way back when. In contrast, I will say in earth science, when the Bush administration first proposed EOS, they came up and told us it was $17 billion. And we just about fell out of our chair and threw the earth science people out of the office and said, and then we came back and we said, we're going to cut the 10-year run out $5 billion. And then they came back the next year and we cut it another $1 billion. And then the Democrats lost control of the Congress and the Republicans cut it further. And you know what? Every one of those core 4 missions, they went on time and on budget, because we capped the cost of every instrument. And we said, if you overrun the instrument, it's gone. And it worked. And so the trick is how you inject discipline into these missions in the planning, like our colleagues have said here, I think, in part, because planetary is such an exciting field. I mean, although with Webb, you look at the traffic to NASA websites, I want to say it jumped 20% between the launch of Webb and today. It went up, 30 some million. If you look, and that's a big number, largely attributable to people's eyeballs drawn to those pictures. My colleagues?
So how do you actually get that cost control in place? If you set out, let's say you decide you're going to do this on a firm fixed price contract, you can't come back and change the rules, right? You can't change the goalpost. The companies are going to ask you for more money and your price is going to go up. So it's real simple from that standpoint. Lay out the plan, follow the rules, and just say, this is all I need, and push really, really hard against people that want to add things. I know it's really cool. Let's add this. No, we're not going to add it. You have to stick with what you started with.
And when there's a higher cadence, you can do that more easily, right?
Yes.
And if you have a shared planning exercise, couple that with a shared commitment to deliver on schedule, on budget, and with the performance that was agreed to.
I don't know if I have too much to add, but I think, so the reason why I mentioned the decadal, and I'm glad you brought it up, is because I think you're right. It's inspirational, right? So you have all these questions, which are for the next decade, these are the top 15 things that we have to do, we would like to do in order to advance science. But then at some point that has to translate into missions that are realizable, right? So if I look at James Webb, it took 21 years, right? Hubble took a long time, right? So I don't think we can afford anymore that kind of timelines, right? And so what I'm asking is there another way to re-energize the decadal survey so that the recommendations are still really truly based on science, but they have shorter horizons, shorter targets for horizons? That is not satisfying, that will not satisfy, obviously, the need for flagships, right? Flagships are still going to be there. We need the flagship like James Webb. We need the Hubbles. We need the Habitable Worlds. The things in the future. Those are still going to be there, and there's a huge role that this center, Goddard can play, NASA can play, obviously, in all of this. But maybe there's a different way in which we test, or at least we test the technology development for these missions in a faster way.
And bring in a bit of agile planning.
Yeah, and I don't have
concepts.
the answer to that, to be honest, right? I'm just wondering if there must be, if the cycle is accelerated, along the lines of what we're talking about, there's a potential for achieving flagship on maybe on a different timeline, I would argue.
Yeah, I think we're coming from the same place. Returning to the decadal, we actually defined the Uranus orbiter and probe
Yeah.
to be what we need to achieve the science. No bells and whistles, nothing fancy, no new technology. Focused on the science, focused on what we can do, and limiting the timeline. The problem with the two outermost planets is it takes a long time to
Correct.
get there, and it's
Yep.
really hard. So when we defined this mission, it was the highest priority for the science, and we wanted to keep it simple. And I'm hearing echoes of that from what you're saying. So I think we're on the same sheet of music here.
Agreed.
We're trying to get it started this year.
Yes.
So I'll bring it back, and you mentioned elephants in the room a couple times. But you talked, your original question was, how do we do this reset in exploration and science? And we talk about decadal and commercial and contracting, all the rest of that, but tell us how we talk about it, what's the phrase? Yeah. How does this play in Peoria, or how does it even play in Mar-a-Lago or at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? What are the things that we need to be talking about to make, you talk about China, but changing these things around so that it really lights a fire of, do you want to lose this race to China for not just getting to the moon, but doing the science exploration, both astrophysics and planetary and earth science? How do we talk about that to light up the general public that doesn't understand what a decadal survey is?
So that's a topic of discussion at our company all the time. The reality is if we sit in rooms like this where everyone is aerospace, right? And we talk about this, no one outside this room cares. They just don't care. So from a moon perspective, one of the things that we're looking at is, what is that thing on the moon that would excite Peoria, as you said? What is that thing? And we're actively trying to find that thing. What is it? Is it something we can bring back? Is it helium-3? Is it titanium? What is it? I don't know what it is yet, but that's the goal that commercial companies are looking at, because that's what brings money to companies, right? And when that comes, and we're going on a regular cadence to the moon, and we're bringing back this exciting thing for residents of Peoria, we can do science, right? And we're going on a regular basis, and it cuts your costs way, way down. And so in the end, it's beneficial to everyone. So similar to the question of how do you merge human spaceflight and science, how do you merge commercial and science? That's how you do it. You have to find a way to fund most of the work with, finance money, or money that we're using from people from Peoria that are interested in buying a moon ring.
So pick up on that with, accomplishments, right? And a higher cadence of accomplishments makes a difference. The fact that pretty much there's global interest in major accomplishments in space is a matter of course. Kevin, you just said the uptick on the global access on NASA sites after James Webb Space Telescope. I would imagine that the viewership of seeing Butch and Sonny return yesterday was about as pretty close to 100%, right? Some very high percentage of the population was tracking that. So there is a definite interest in common ground, right? Global commons, common ground of space, of being interest to all people. And just reflecting back on a comment a few minutes ago, and I'm not sure how it lands in the community, but this issue of global affinity is a very real thing. It's the foundation, speaking of the Chinese, for their Belts and Roads program. That is what they are doing. They are making investments so that they can build relationships with other players in the world, so they can get favorable terms on activities that they're seeking to accomplish. I just, again, I offered a foot stomp a minute ago. I'll foot stomp it again.
But it's a soft power projection. I mean, that's essentially what, we offer. And if you look, I mean, what they say about China, if you look at astronomy, you look at what they've done in Chile, and they have planted 5 or 6 centers with Chilean partners in astronomy. They've done this very deliberately because ultimately they want to build a telescope down there to look up, and it's for the stars and for a few other things that are up there. And the point is that the United States has, we have to be talking about it like that. And that's the appeal to the Trump administration, and the fact that it's American innovation, American technology. I mean, and that's, again, America first. Yes. On the world stage, we are the leaders, and we give away the data for free because we are a great democracy. And that's, that's always my old boss, Sarah Mikulski. Great nations do what we do in space, but great democracies allow the world to see it for themselves because they want them to understand the power of that knowledge, and that a democratic society drove the investment to make that possible. So we're getting more into the prose version, and we're coming to the end. And so we talk about budgets, right? That's Washington. What is Washington? Love is where you fund it. I mean, that's not what we said on the Appropriations Committee, but you know what I'm getting at. The National Security Space Association issued a paper at the end of last week calling over the next 5 years to double the budget of the United States Space Force, which today is 20% bigger. It's only 5 years old. It's 20% bigger than the NASA budget. My question to our colleagues here is, why isn't anybody talking about doubling the NASA budget and keeping parity with the Space Force so that the twin goals of national security and civil and commercial leadership in space is driven by the United States of America? What do you think? Why isn't that happening?
You're in Washington. Why isn't it happening?
Well, it's got to be from the, as we would say, I studied to be a priest for 11 years. It's from the sense of the faithful, the sensus fidelium here, right? That's in the Catholic tradition. There's a great, the truths of the church come through the sense of the faithful.
Yeah.
So if that's what's happening, right, and if that's what happens, then we as NASA people, and I count myself as a NASA person, I haven't spent 20 years as NASA, we need to find a way to advance our causes with that reality, right? And so what are partnerships that we can do with the Space Force? What are partnerships that we can do with NASA science, with NASA technology, and with Space Force technology on the same missions? There's ways we can do that. We have to be willing to partner with them. So if that becomes the reality, find ways to partner. Make lemonade.
I would say, again, a couple of things in my head, right? So one, I like the partnership, and the way I would like to see the partnership going is there's a interesting outpost that NASA, even Lori mentioned it, is a gateway, right? That we're building a gateway, and Cislunar. Cislunar is a pretty interesting perch out there for many applications, not just civil applications, for example, right? So can we partner with the Space Force to figure out how we can even enable them to have scientific measurements from there, or measurements from there that they probably don't know about, or they don't think about in the way we do, right? Because scientists want everything all the time, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think it's we need to have an idea, a good idea of what outcome we want, right, out of this potential partnership with the Space Force. And I would say maybe the last thing I would say is organizations like this, the AAS, all the AAS, American Astronomical Society, the society here, the Astronautical Society, all the organizations are organizations that support science, AGU, for example, things like that, have been, I would say, relatively silent with the potential disruption to science in the future. And those organizations have to step up. If we're quiet, then we're going to see budgets decline.
Yeah, there's tremendous value to the community coming together. There's no question. But on this question of Space Force or defense and civil, Space Force and NASA, there are significant opportunities for joint use. joint use areas, right? Launch is common, to both, right? Observations, common to both, communications, likewise. There are a whole series of absolutely fundamental, back to Orbit's comment about infrastructure, absolutely fundamental layers of infrastructure that are foundational for all space activities. And the opportunity to be able to recognize the value of developing capabilities in each of these areas in the civil sector and through NASA as an organization are not as well, the merits of those virtues are not extolled nearly as well as they could be. There's a comment there.
Any questions from the audience here as we wind down in the last few minutes here? I know it's getting late.
All right.
Up front here.
So I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but pulling it all together, we talked about Sonny and Butch coming down, and I'm going to tell you, I have 18 first cousins on one side of my family.
Wow.
Not a one of them watched that.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
my hairdresser, not. So my question is, inside us, those of us who are energized by space or space junkies or whatever, yes, this is a great thing. I'm not so sure that the regular society sees the impact except through the commercial impact or some things like that. So how do we pull that? You talked about Space Force and NASA. We talk about commercial with NASA. What we're struggling with is how do we make the impact, like Congressman Ivy said, on the regular US Americans' life? How do we connect it for them?
On the first mission that we launched to the moon, we partnered with Columbia Sportswear. We all wore really cool shirts that said Columbia, which was awesome. Columbia put a logo onto our spacecraft, and separately, they took the liner of their jacket and we used it as a thermal insulator as a test of the liner of their jacket. Based on the testing that they did, they got their jackets, their weight of their jackets went down by 30%. After the mission, we did an assessment of how many eyeballs saw Columbia because of our mission. It was 300 billion eyeballs. Now, how is that possible? There's only 8 billion people on the planet. There were that many eyeballs could have seen it that so many times that it was 300 billion eyeballs that could have seen Columbia because of the news that went out about the mission. That's how you get more people engaged. You don't talk about stuff that we do in here. You talk about stuff that they see on a regular basis. And you have to be willing to do that. And when you have commercial entities doing that, you can, right? And I worked for NASA for a long time. We can never put commercial advertisement on space station or whatever. I do it right now. On the first mission, I had an art project from Jeff Koons built and put onto the surface of the moon. A whole different community that would typically never talk about space was talking about space.
Well, and that's what you have to do. I mean, in the new world of advocacy in Washington, it's not just front door shoe leather advocacy. It's now you use social media, you use all of these digital platforms. I mean, it's scary what you can do with these geo-fenced campaigns and digital, whether you want to play offense or defense, and you target it to people. I mean, what's the pitch on TikTok, right? I mean, go home and talk to all of your 20-something-year-old children. I mean, where do they get their news from? It's not from, Lester Holt, as good as he is, right? I mean, generally speaking, it's not. And that's where, if people ask me why I changed stripes and went to this new strategic consulting firm, it's because we have that kind of capability. That's what you have to do. You have to go to where people are and use the heritage of many of the great stories. And kids will be wowed by the images and the accomplishments and the technology, but it's the media through which you have to reach them. And that's where I think, Webb has proven really phenomenal, but what comes next after that, right? Because everybody thinks routine, going to space is routine, right? That's the whole SpaceX model. We can launch, every other day, which is why it's so routine. And which is why the Apollo program kind of wore out in the mid 70s. We need to think about using the new media to revitalize why people need to stay enthusiastic, because the things are out there for them to do it. The justifications for it. So thank you all.